Swift Squad, in this video we're going to learn how we can pass data back and forth between view controllers to edit data, to add data. We'll learn about prepare for segue. We'll create unwind actions, exit segues. We'll learn about various table view methods and properties, including indexPathForSelectedRow, reloadRows, insertRows, and scrollToRow. Swifter, are you ready? Buckle up and let's get at it! As we talk about passing data between view controllers, we'll show where the data comes from, where the data is going, and then we'll illustrate the steps that we need to code in the order that we need to code them in order to get our data passed from one view controller to another. Now what we'll end up with is a chunk of code that's super easy to modify, but we're going to do this in steps, and first we're going to focus on just passing the data if you click on a single cell to either show that data or edit it. We'll cover what to do when pressing the add button in just a bit. We're going to pass data between a source and a destination. And the source is our to-do list view controller with the scrollable table view. Now when you click on an individual cell, we're going to grab the data out of that cell, perform a show segue, and put the data inside of our destination. So let's figure out what we need to do. First, what holds the data in the table view? Well, that's our to-do array. Now how do we find out what cell was clicked? Well, there's a property associated with tableView. It's called indexPathForSelectedRow. It's an optional because sometimes the row isn't selected, but we're going to force unwrap it because we're only going to look at this value after the user has clicked on a cell. That means we know we'll have a value in here, we'll never get nil. Now how do I get the data that was clicked? Well, if we know the index path for the cell it was clicked on, we can simply say to-do array, and then in brackets, tableViewController.indexPathForSelectedRow unwrapped.row. That gives us the index value. Click on the third cell down, it'll give you the index value of 2. Now where can I put the selected data? This is step 1. We need to create a variable that's going to catch the data that's being passed from the source to the destination. We're going to create that in the destination. In this case, we're going to pass a string from the array of strings that's in the source. So we'll create a string value and we'll call it to-do item. We'll declare it as a force unwrapped optional because we know we'll eventually have some stuff inside of it, but we won't initialize it. The data is coming from the source. Now also super important, after we catch the value, we need to display it in the user interface. So specifically what we're going to do in our case is we're going to update nameField.text, that's this field right here, with the value that we just caught that's called to-do item. Now here's the second step. This is what we need to code in the source, and we're going to use what we learned up here. We're going to implement one of Apple's functions called prepare for segue. Now this function is triggered inside of the view controller whenever it's about to segue away. Click on a cell, that cell is attached to the show segue. Before we go from source to destination, prepare for segue in the source is going to run. What are we going to put inside this? Well, first let's see which segue we're going to run. By taking a look at the identifier for the segue, we can verify, hey, let's do the stuff we want to do when you've clicked on the show detail segue. Prepare for segue takes a segue parameter, so it's actually going to feed in the segue that was clicked, and there's a property of the segue called identifier that can tell us what the identifier is. Next, we want to be really clear about the destination where we're going. Now, segue also has a destination property. The destination property points to where we're going, but it points to this as a UI view controller. That's the standard unsubclassed version of the blueprint for this destination. The thing is, we want to make sure that we get the subclassed version of the blueprint, the one that says to-do table detail view controller. How come? Because this has got all the data structures inside of it that are associated with this and only this blueprint. Why is this important? Because the view controller named to-do detail table view controller and not a standard UI view controller is the only one that's going to have this variable to-do item that we just created over here that's going to catch the value. So now we know we're going to go from the source to the destination, and the destination is set up with a value called to-do item that can catch what we're passing. We want to get the value of the index path that was selected. Which cell did you click on? Force unwrap it. Use the indexPaths.row property to find the index in our to-do array. Grab the element at that index and slap it in destination, which is this guy, .to-do item, which is this variable. And so here's a quick visualization with values. Let's imagine you click on the third cell down here that says change the world. That fires the prepare for segue. Inside, we check to see what the identifier is for the segue we're about to execute. We find out that it's show detail. We verify where we're going. So we set up destination as segue.destination. That's over here, and we specifically downcast it to do detail table view controller so that we can access the to-do item. Now what's this value here, the third one down? Well, the selected index indexPath.row is 2, remember that these things are 0 indexed, 0, 1, 2. Then we take the 2 value in here, and then this line down here, we go to ToDo array, selected indexPath.row, which is 2, which is change the world. That's what we put inside of destination.ToDoItem. So that's going to update over here. ToDoItem is going to be change the world in this view controller. Then we want to make sure that we update nameField.text with ToDoItem. That's going to show it in this field. Let's do it. Now with the to-do list project open, we need to perform that first step, which is in the destination view controller, create a variable to catch the data that we're about to pass over from the source. What's the destination? That's the view controller to-do detail view controller.swift. So click on that one, and then let's declare this variable to catch the data. So we'll say var, we'll call this to-do item, we'll declare it but not initialize it. So we'll say colon, string, and I'll end it in an exclamation point so it's an implicitly unwrapped optional. Now when we click on a cell in the other view controller, that's where we're going to pass our data over, and that's where this value is going to get initialized. Now one more thing, after we get this value, we need to update our user interface. So we'll go down here into view did load, and we'll say nameField.text equals ToDoItem. If we didn't do this, we wouldn't see our user interface updated. So we just finished the first step mentioned on the previous slide. So with our catch variable set up in our destination, let's head over to our source and pass the data over. So in the project navigator, click the file to-do list view controller.swift. That's our source. Now we're going to use an Apple function called prepare for segue. And why don't we put that in just before the close curly in our class. So for now, this will be the last function in the class. Now, as I start to type prepare, I see one of the options is the method prepare for segue. That's going to pass in a UI storyboard segue. Now, this function gets triggered automatically just before a segue happens in this view controller, and it's going to pass in the actual segue that I can refer to in this function as segue. And notice the description and code completion notifies the view controller that the segue is about to be performed. So find this one, press return. Now inside, the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure we know which segue was called. So we can use the identifier property of the segue that's being passed in as part of this function. We'll say if segue.identifier, notice the identifier, it says the identifier of the segue object, equals, and now we need to put in the identifier string for the segue that's triggered when we click on a cell. So I'll put in my double quotes, open and close curlies, and then I'm going to hop over to main storyboard just to show you. I'm going to click on the show segue. This is the one we're working with. So I've clicked on the little ball here, look up in the attributes inspector, and I can see the identifier says show detail in upper camel case. So I can just highlight this and copy with a Command C, return to my code in to-do list view controller, and Command V paste it right in here. It's absolutely critical that you spell things correctly with the same case. Otherwise, your segue isn't going to be recognized. You'll be talking about two different things. Now inside the curly, let's set up a constant to hold our destination. We'll call it destination. Let destination equals, and we'll say segue.destination. Now notice destination is a UI view controller, and this is a problem for us because this is the standard blueprint. It's not our specific to-do tableView view controller, which has the variable we just created. So I'm going to press enter here, and then I'm going to do an as exclamation point. Now what that does is it allows me to set the name of the subclass so that we can make sure that we get the exact detail in the file that we want in the destination. So by saying as exclamation point to-do detail table view controller, we say, hey, our destination isn't just a UI view controller, it's the to-do detail table view controller. And that one has the to-do list variable we just created. So we'll be able to refer to it in our code. If we didn't do this downcasting, we wouldn't be able to refer to that variable. So make sure you've highlighted to-do detail table view controller and press return to accept it. So now we got our destination, where our segue is headed. Now let's find where the user clicked. And remember, when you click on something, that's the index path of the cell. So we're going to create a constant, let, and name it selected index path. We'll set it equal to tableView dot, and if we start typing in index in here, look at the different options. This one here, indexPathForSelectedRow, has the description, an index path identifying the row and section of the selected row. Now that's great. Since we only have one section, we can ignore the dot section property, but we are going to use this values dot row property. Highlight this one and press enter. Now, if you option click on selected index path, it's an optional. How come? Because technically it's possible that the table view's .index path for selected row is nil. That would be if there's no selection. But we are 100% certain that whenever this show detail segue is clicked, it's attached to a table view cell, so we will get a value. And we need the exact path. We don't want it to be optionally wrapped, so we're going to put an exclamation point right after index path for selected row. Then down here, what we do is we just say destination, and notice next to destination and code completion, it says that this is a to-do detail table view controller. That's what that as exclamation point downcast did. So press enter to select it, then press dot, And code completion will show us all of the methods and variables associated with the ToDo detail table view controller. Find ToDo item, that's this string down here that we just created, and press return to accept it. What does this equal? Well, it's going to equal our array, ToDo array, and we want the specific index, which is at selected index path. But remember, we want the .row of that index path. So look at our code. If the user performs an action that's about to segue, iOS fires this prepare for segue. Which segue is triggered? Well, first we're dealing with the case of show detail. We're going to create the destination, make sure it's the ToDo detail table view controller. We're going to find out the index path of the table view cell that was clicked. We're going to set our destination ToDo item. Our destination is this guy right here, to ToDo array in the specific row of the index path that was clicked. Build and run and let's see. Build succeed. What happens if we learn Swift? It says learn Swift. What about build apps? Build apps. What about take a vacation? Would be nice, but we got apps to build. Let's change the world. Excellent. So we're passing data over. Let's figure out how we can pass data back. Because if we go in here, change the world, and we put in something like right now, exclamation point, and click on save. Oh, save isn't doing anything. So we got a little bit more to learn. Let's go. So these are our steps to go back. We've got a new source and a new destination. The source was the destination. So we're coming from here, we're going back here. And we're going to refer to the process of going back to the original view controller as unwinding. We never draw a segue back to where we came from. That creates a circle. That's bad programming practice, and it can lead to app crashes. So how do we go ahead and do an unwind? Let's take this step by step. First, we want to grab the value that's inside of this text field. That's the value in namefield.text. So as our first step, what we're going to do is we're going to write a prepare for segue. We wrote one in here, now we're going to write one in here. And this is going to handle what's going to happen when we unwind. So when we're about to segue back, we're going to go into namefield.text, this guy here, and we're going to update that catch variable ToDo item, because this is the value that we use in our game of catch that passes values back and forth. Step number 2. That's back here in our to-do list view controller. We're going to add a new function. It's an IB action function, and we're going to call it unwind from detail. Now, this is the first time we're going to create an IB action without control dragging from the main storyboard, so we're going to write this. We could give this any name, but unwind from detail is a good name. Now, this function always has one parameter. We're going to call it segue. It's the storyboard segue that we're using to unwind. I'll show you how to create that in just a second. But when we trigger this unwind, what we're going to do first is we're going to identify the source. Remember, that's this guy up here. Previously, it was the destination. Now it's the source. We do our downcast, which we learned previously, which will give us access to all the variables inside, including our catch variable, ToDo item. Then down here in if let, we take a look and say, hey, do we have a value that is not nil inside of tableView.indexPathForSelectedRow? Before you went over here, was there something that was selected? If it was selected, it is not nil. So we will create a constant called selectedIndexPath. If there's no selection, that means tableView.indexPathForSelectedRow has nil inside, so we don't create the constant and we skip what's in the curlies. That's what if let does. But since we clicked over here as our first segue, which was show detail, we still have the selection back here, and we're going to use this value that was selected. How are we going to use it? We are going to specifically go into ToDo array at the index selectedIndexPath.row, the thing that we had selected when we moved over, and we're going to update it with source, which is this guy, .ToDo item, which is this guy, which we updated as part of the prepare for segue. Then we use this function tableView.reloadRows. That's going to display the data that we just updated. Notice that the function is named rows. There's not a singular one. So what we need to do is we need to put selected index path inside of brackets. It's an array of 1. It would be nice if there was a reloadRow function that allowed us to pass in just one row. There's not, so we pass in an array of 1 row. We'll do that with the automatic animation. Then we've got a third step. So we've been referring to a segue in here. How do we set that up? Well, on the main storyboard, what we're going to do is we're going to control drag from the save button for this view controller here into this little exit icon on the dock of our ToDo detail table view controller. So this is a special exit segue. It's still a segue. You can consider it to be an unwind segue. It's not one of those ones where we draw an arrow. That's not how you want to go back. Never draw an arrow to go back. That's going to screw up your code. Now, once we drag this over and let go inside of the exit box, we'll get a list of anything we could possibly use as an unwind segue for our exit. Only one option shows up. That's this unwind for detail that we just created. Select it, and our code is ready to run. Explicit execution demo. Let's imagine we change the value that used to be in here, which was change the world, and change it to be the change. Then we imagine we click on the save button. Before we execute our exit segue, prepare for segue executes. That pulls out what was inside of namefield.text. It updates to-do item. What's it going to put in there? Be the change. Then over here, we execute unwind. We identify the source, this view controller. We check to see if we've got a value and not a nil value in tableView.indexPathForSelectedRow. And we do. It's 2. Remember, 0, 1, 2. That's this value that was pointed to change the world. But we're about to update it. We go into to-do array, selected indexPath.row, which is 2. We assign it to source, which is this, to-do item, which is this, be the change, and we see it updates. It updates explicitly when we update the table view, reloading rows at an array, because it's got brackets, of only one value, which is selected index path, which is the index path in our one section that has 2 as its row value. That's how it works. Let's go ahead and do this and see if we can get our code operating in the same way. So back in our code, I'll get in my full screen editor and we'll go into to-do detail table view controller. And this is where we need to put in a prepare for segue. I'll do that in between view did load and cancel button pressed. If I start to type in prepare for segue, the stub is added by Xcode. Thank you, Xcode. And all we want to do in here is we want to update to-do item with the value that's inside of namefield.text. That's it. Now let's go over to to-do list view controller. This is where we want to add our unwind. Typically we add our unwind right after our prepare for segue, because this goes over, the unwind goes back. First time we've ever done this. At IB action, we're going to write our IB action, then func, then let's give it a name. Unwind from detail is a good name. And we need to put in the parameter that we're accepting in here. It's going to be named segue, and it is a UI storyboard segue. Make sure that you select the segue and not just storyboard. Press enter, open and close curlies, and let's write our code. First, in the way that we got a destination up here, we want to get a source down here. It's going to be the same line, except we'll change the name from destination to source. And instead of getting segue.destination, we're going to get segue.source. Now we're going to check to see if the table view has an existing row selection, because if it does, that's the row we want to update. So we're going to say if let selected index path equals table view index path for selected row. If there is a value which is not nil in here, we will execute what's inside the curlies. If there is a nil value in here, we will skip the curlies. So we have a value that's in here. If the user had previously clicked on a cell, we're remembering what that click was, so that when we return with our unwind, we can go into the cell that was clicked and update the data and redraw the cell. How do we update the data? Well, the data is kept inside a to-do array. Which element do we update? Well, that's going to be selected index path dot row. What's it going to be equal to? Well, that's going to be the source dot to-do item, which we recently updated. Then we simply go into our table view, reload rows. It would be nice if there was a reload row. There is not. So what we've got to do is we've got to put our index path in brackets and pass it in as an array that has only one element, a single index path. That's at selected index path, not dot row here, just selected index path with, what's the animation? We'll accept automatic. But wait, there's more. We've got to go over to main storyboard and set up this special exit segue. Remember, you never draw a line back. That creates a circular reference, and that's going to screw up your code. It could lead to crashes and memory leaks. Remember, this structure is like the branches of a tree. It's not like a circle, so we never circle back. So how do we set up our special segue? Inside the save button, we'll control click. Drag this item over here. By the way, if you hover over, it says exit. This is where we set up our exit segue. I will release. It asks us, hey, what do you want our unwind segue to be when this segue is triggered? We want unwind from detail with segue. There's only one that we created. Boom, that's it. It shows up at the bottom down here. We don't even need to give it an identifier. Let's just go ahead, build and run, and enjoy the majesty of our code. What are you ready to do, coder? Change the world. How about be the change? Click on save. There we go. We've updated it. Magnificent. Still got a little bit more to go, though. So in our previous slides, it said that we almost had everything working. What we've done is we've allowed you to click on and pass over data from the individual cells and update those cells if you click on save and pass the data back, but we haven't taken care of the situation where you would create a new value by clicking on the plus button. So once again, when we start, this is our source, this is our destination. If you click on the plus button, what's going to happen? Well, we want to make a change here because we're not going to be passing a value over. Now, when we clicked on an individual cell, that table view had a value at indexPathForSelectedRow. When we came back, we looked to see if there was a value for indexPathForSelectedRow. It pointed to the value that we clicked on to go over here, and that's the value we need to update. But when we click on plus, we don't want to update a clicked value. So what we're going to do is we are going to write code down here that says, hey, if we're executing and it's not show detail, remember the segue that goes up here is called add detail. We're going to skip these curlies. We're going to see if there's an existing selection that might have existed if you clicked a row beforehand and came back, and we're going to deselect any selection so that we have a nil value in here. What will happen when we click on plus then? Well, we're not passing over a value to the destination because we have no value, because it's going to be a new value. When we arrive, to-do item is going to be nil. So what we're going to do in viewDidLoad is we're going to make sure that to-do item has something in it. It's just going to be the empty string. But we'll write some code that says if to-do item equals nil, which would be the case if we're creating a new row because we're not taking any existing data, we'll just set it up to empty string. Let's do it. So we'll start in to-do list view controller.swift, and we're going to update prepare for segue. In the case when we haven't clicked on a segue with the identifier show detail, well, we must be on our other segue. We only have two segues. The other one is add detail. We don't even have to check that. We would want to check it if we had more than two segues. What do we want to examine here? We're going to say if let selected index path equals tableView dot index path for selected row. This means, hey, do we have an existing selection? Since we're clicking on the plus button, we want to deselect it. How do we deselect it? We simply say tableView dot deselect row at, that's our currently selected index path, and animated, we'll say true. First part, set up. What's up next? Now let's head over to to-do detail table view controller. In viewDidLoad, we're going to check to see if we received a value. So we're going to say if to-do item equals nil. If it is equal to nil, then what we want to do is we want to set this to the empty string, just so that we don't have a nil value in here. Everything's set up, just a little bit more to do. Let's take a look at some slides. We've now got to update our unwind segue to account for the fact that we might be returning with a whole new value that we need to add to the end of our data. So once again, when we come back, this is our source, this is our destination. Let's imagine you've just added a value that says, make dinner for the family, and click save. We're going to update the unwind from detail function with an else clause. And in this clause, we're going to create a new index path. That's going to hold the new row that we are about to insert. This should be at a value that is 1 past the last element in the array. The last element in the array is 0, 1, 2, 3. So if we say toDoArray.count, that will give us a row for the index path right at the end here where we can insert things. Then we take our to-do array and we append the value coming from source, that is to-do item. We've already updated this in prepare for segue, so we're good. We don't need to touch the code over in our source. Next, we insert rows, which is just one row. Again, this is one of those plural functions that doesn't have a singular, at the new index path that we created. We'll do that right at the bottom, and then we'll scroll the table view to that row. Let's do it. So to get everything working, we're down in unwind from detail. In to-do list view controller.swift, we're going to add an else clause. This else clause will execute if the selected index path was nil. And it will be nil if we clicked on the plus button, because if we clicked on the plus button, our segue identifier is add detail. It is not show detail, so we deselected any existing index path. So what do we do on return? We need to create a new index path. Let new index path equal, and then we'll say capital index path, because we are creating a new index path value. We're referring to the type. Open parentheses. We get a bunch of different options in here. We want to select the one with a row and a section. What is our row going to be? This is going to be our to-do array.count. That will create the row 1 past the last element in the array. So there's a space for us now to add this new value. The section will be 0 because we only have one section. Then we need to refer to our to-do array and append the new value that we're getting from the source. So that's going to be source.toDo item. Now that we've got everything updated, we'll say tableView, insertRows. Unfortunately, there's not an insertRow at. We got to put this inside array brackets, but it's going to be our new index path with, and the animation will be bottom since we're inserting it right to the bottom. Then let's conveniently scroll the user down to the row that we just inserted. There's a TableView method, scrollToRow. That'll be at indexPath, new indexPath. It's not an array here because you only scroll down to one location. Our scroll position will be bottom, and our animated will be true. It's so subtle you might not even see it. Now let's build and run, see how everything looks. Let's change the world and be the change. But let's go ahead and add here. We can't forget our loved ones. Make dinner for the family. Click on save. Magnificent! It's added down below. Build apps for apps class. No problem here. Add one more value. Continue in awesomeness! Exclamation point. And it works perfectly. Now here's the beauty of what we've just done. Even though there was some complex explanation, you can repeat these same steps over and over again in similar apps. So if you want to set up a destination view controller to catch stuff coming from another view controller that's got a scrollable table view, well, you're probably going to have a different value to catch that data. You're probably going to have different interface element items to update on the view controller itself, but everything else should be set up the same way. How about your prepare for segue that's over in the same view controller with the scrollable table view? Well, you may have a different segue identifier, you might have a different destination view controller, you may have different names for your data both in the destination and in the array in this view controller that holds the table view data, but other than that, the function is going to be identical. Also, if you ever copy this code from a working app and paste it into a similar project that's got different names for these values, Xcode will flag them all as errors, giving you a heads up on what to change. The one thing it can't tell is if your segue identifier is different, so be aware of that. And how's your unwind different? Again, your view controller might have a different name, your data source values might have a different name, but other than that, the code is going to work exactly the same. There's your recipe, another ingredient in the cupboard to bake app goodness. Guess what the challenge is going to be? Do the exact same thing that we just did, but do it in EU. You're up for it. Pause. Do what you need to do. And resume. Let's see how you did. So now I've got our EU app open, and this is the version that's current from the last challenge exercise we did. Now the first thing I'm going to do is click on detail table view controller.swift because I want to create a variable that's going to catch the individual member nation that's being passed over. So I'm going to create a variable up top, var member, I'll say colon, string, exclamation point. So this declares but does not initialize the value. Down here in view did load, I'm going to check to see if member is nil. And if member is nil, I'm going to make sure that member has an empty string in it. Then I'm going to update our country field, .text attribute, with member. Now there's one other thing we're going to need in here. We're going to need to prepare for segue. That's when we're headed back, and this should update member, whatever's inside a country field .text. Now let's head over to viewcontroller.swift. And in here we need to add a prepare for segue and an unwind. But watch what we can do. At this stage in your software development career, I definitely recommend that you retype in the code because that'll help you continually look at the statements and reinforce your understanding of what they're doing. But to show you we've built a recipe here, almost a software Lego, with just a few things that need to be updated, and Xcode will tell us where those are, I'm going to go back over into our to-do list code, copy the prepare and unwind segue from the to-do list view controller, go back over into EU in the view controller, which is where we have our list of member countries. Paste this in. You do want to make sure that your segue identifier is the same, but I remember I used show detail as the identifier for the show segue in this app as well. Notice we're getting a bunch of errors in here on every line we need to change. We don't have a to-do detail view controller. We just have a detail view controller. We don't have a to-do array. We have a members array. We don't have a to-do item at our destination. We've got a member item at our destination. Nothing else needs to be changed in prepare for segue. Down here, we need to make the changes that are flagged. Change to-do detail to detail. Change the to-do array to members. Change the source to-do item to member. Any place where we have to-do arrays should change to members. Any place where we have to-do item should be member. And that's it. Our code is reusable. Let's head over to main storyboard and create that exit segue. Remember how we do that. We click on the save button, control drag up to this little exit guy here, select the unwind from detail segue we just did, build and run. All right, here are our countries down here. We got United Kingdom down in here. And oh, United Kingdom is no longer a country in the EU. What if we change it to Scotland? And we just did! How about that? What if we want to add a country? Let's say Catalan wants to get in there. Click on save. We've added Catalan at the end. And let's say the good folks of Cyprus decide they want to change their name to Swiftlandia. We can update them as well. Coder, you are definitely a TableView talent. Feel good about your skills. Keep at it.